So not a lot of uplift with this. We're just looking at the structure. None of it is conceptually difficult. You've just got to go away and learn it. Now we're looking at the internal structure of the heart. And first of all, I just want us to imagine that the heart is a box. The box has got 4 parts to it. Clearly, we know that the top part are the atria, and the bottom 2 are ventricles. And of course, when you're talking about the heart, you're talking about your own heart. So the left is on this side and the right is on this side. So that is opposite on a piece of paper. The heart has a thinner wall for the atria, because the atria literally just take the blood from the blood vessels, whereas the ventricles have a much thicker muscular wall, because they're the ones that create the pressure to squeeze the blood into the arteries that takes it either round the body or round the lungs. So this has a much thicker wall on the left side because it's pumping blood around the body, and the right side has muscle around it, but not as much as the left side. And when you do a heart dissection, and you can actually see that, you can see the thickness in the myocardium, the muscle of the heart. Where do these lead to? Well, let's just imagine that we've got our lungs up here, and we've got the body down here. And we know arteries carry blood away from the heart. So coming out of the left ventricle will be the main blood vessel, which is the aorta. It's an artery carrying blood oxygenated away from the heart. And then, of course, it drops off the oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide, drops off the glucose, comes back to the right atria. Now, ideally, we wouldn't have a heart that acts as 2 separate pumps. Ideally, we would be like a fish, where they have gills, but we'll call them lungs, and we have a pump, which in our case is the heart and the body. And what would happen is the oxygenated blood would come, would give it a pump, it would drop off around the body, and it would return to the lungs or the gills to pick up more oxygen. But of course, this can't happen in a human. Once all the blood has dropped off the oxygen, picked up the carbon dioxide, it's gone through that capillary bed. The capillary bed has a huge surface area, creates a lot of resistance, a lot of drag, and so we're now at negative pressure. And to do that again, if it was going back to the lungs, there simply wouldn't be enough pressure in the blood to push it through the capillary bed that is the lungs. So it has to go back to the heart for another pump to give it a bit more pressure to get it through the lungs. So here we go, back to the atria, back through to the ventricles, back to the lungs, and then the lungs take it back to the heart. So the only blood vessels you actually need to be able to name are the aorta, the vena cava, the main vein that takes it from the body back to the heart, and then from the ventricles it's going to the lungs. Anything to do with the lungs is pulmonary, so it's going away from the heart, so it's a pulmonary artery. And then coming back to the heart, it's the pulmonary vein. So that's our diagrammatic scheme of it. Removing the image underneath, it would now look like that. We've got our 4 chambers and dropping off from the body, carrying it back to the lungs. Here's a high-end worksheet that I have done with my class today, and you'll see from the instructions there that what I ask you to do is colour in the different parts. So the whole point of doing that activity is so that when you look at this diagram of the heart here, you're able to work out exactly what's going on. So let's have a look at it. Your starting point is to remember the aortic arch. Easy. Aortic arch rolls off the tongue quite well. And what it means is the arch that the aorta creates as it comes out of the heart. And that is this thing here.
This is your aortic arch.
And if we trace that back through, we can see that it comes from the ventricle. So all of this here is the ventricle, and this bit is the atria. So the atria is very small compared to the ventricle, squeezes the blood through. When that squeezes from the apex up, out comes the blood out of the aortic arch. Over on this side, we've got the ventricle again, and here's the atria, and this one you can see is squeezing blood out through the pulmonary artery. It's an artery because it's going away from the heart, and you can see here it's splitting into two directions to go to both sides of the lungs. If we look at what these blood vessels are, well, these are going into the atria. So this one coming from the body must be the vena cava, and this one feeding into the atria must be coming down from the brain, feeding deoxygenated blood into that side of the heart, ready for it to go off back to the lungs. They're the only blood vessels really that you need to know about. Here we've got a couple of valves. Let's just talk about this one and this one. It separates the atria from the ventricles. It separates the atria from the ventricles. But on this side it's called the bicuspid valve. And this one is the tricuspid. And when the pressure of blood in the atria here exceeds the pressure inside the ventricles, then this bicuspid valve is forced open and blood moves through. When the pressure inside the ventricle exceeds the atria, then the bicuspid valve is snapped shut. And the same is true over here. Now, the other types of valve that you need to know about are these semilunar valves here. Because again, what we'll be talking about in the next lesson is every single time the ventricle contracts, it pushes blood up into the aorta, but as it begins to expand again, then what happens is the blood wants to flow back into the ventricle. So we need these semilunar valves, they're like half moon shaped, to stop that from happening. And the same is true here. As this side of the heart contracts, blood is forced out into the pulmonary artery, but as it relaxes, there's a tendency that the blood wants to move backwards. And to stop that from happening, we've got these semilunar valves here. Now, one thing I see students get confused about again and again is when we talk about coronary arteries. Obviously, coronary is anything to do with the heart, but these big arteries are not coronary arteries. Coronary arteries are the ones that supply the heart muscle itself, and they are teeny tiny. They look like this, and you'll see that they emanate through. They start in the aorta where they branch off. That is where the opening, the blood that comes into there, is highly oxygenated. So what better blood to use to oxygenate the muscle of the heart tissue itself as that blood there. So you'll find a little opening for it, and when the atria contracts, some of that blood is squeezed into the coronary arteries. And then in it feeds, and it's branched, and it feeds the muscle, the cardiac muscle, the myocardium itself. If you get a blockage, a plaque, a fatty deposit in any of these coronary arteries here, then that can stop oxygen being supplied to the muscle that it serves, and that means that that part of the heart can't contract, that bit of the heart can't empty and push the blood around the body. Now, those blockages can actually occur in any of the organs that happen in your body. It might happen in your kidney, it might happen in your liver, but you're only really going to know about it when it happens in the heart, because the consequences of it are so huge. When that part of the muscle tissue is starved, we call it a myocardial infarction. Infarction means starved of oxygen, and myocardial describes the muscle of the heart itself. The only thing left to mention is how the high pressure of the blood created from the heart changes as it moves through the blood vessels. Clearly, it comes out of the heart at high pressure. Within the arteries, we know that it changes, it's going to drop, and then it's going to massively drop over the capillaries and remain pretty standard from there.